Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. The main character, after dying, he gets reborn as Rick inside of Marvel. What will Rick do inside of Marvel? He has the powers of Rick. What is he gonna do inside of Marvel?
Fluctuation from underground power cables. The sweep lasted about 5 minutes before vanishing completely. The monitors went still again. I exhaled slowly. That's better. I spent the next hour running internal diagnostics, making sure the interference readings stayed consistent with the data in the report I'd sent Pepper. Everything matched perfectly. I smiled faintly, satisfied. When I finally went topside, the air felt fresher after hours underground. The sun was already lowering, coloring the city in shades of orange and gold. I walked down the street toward the nearby diner to grab lunch. The waitress there already knew my order: grilled sandwich, fries, and coffee that could wake the dead. I sat at the counter, scrolling through my phone. 10 new emails, half from Tony. The latest one read, Carlson called. He's not mad. Yet. Said the report looked thorough. Nice job. Come by tomorrow. I smiled at the screen and took a sip of coffee. You're welcome, boss. The relief hit slowly. SHIELD was satisfied for now. The fake data worked. Pepper could breathe, Tony could stop arguing with agents, and my secret stayed buried. When I got back to the workshop that night, the tunnel felt calm again. I powered down the extra systems and checked on the mech. Everything was running smooth. The air smelled faintly of oil and heated metal. I leaned against the railing, arms crossed, watching the steady blue glow from the reactor. We're clear again, I said quietly. Let's keep it that way. The lights dimmed slightly as the systems entered standby. I stayed there a few more minutes before heading back upstairs. The following morning, I woke to another buzz from my phone. Tony this time. Morning, Tony, I said cheerfully. Eli, your report saved me from a 2-hour lecture, he said immediately. Pepper said Carlson was satisfied. That's a first. I laughed lightly. Guess I've got a knack for paperwork. Don't let her hear you say that, he said. She'll make you do it every week. I'll take my chances, I replied. Tony paused for a second, his voice sounding more relaxed than usual. Good work, really. I owe you one. I smiled faintly. You can repay me by not sending drones into my neighborhood. He chuckled. No promises. We talked for a few minutes longer about routine projects, nothing heavy, just work talk. He mentioned improving the armor's energy efficiency, and I gave a few quick suggestions. It felt normal again, the tension gone. After the call, I checked my inbox. Pepper had forwarded me an email chain from Carlson's office in acknowledgement of receipt, signed off with a simple line, no further inquiry needed at this time. I stared at it for a second and let out a quiet laugh. You see? Being boring works. The day went by uneventfully after that. I ran minor maintenance checks on the mech's servos, replaced 2 burned-out stabilizer coils, and reorganized the spare materials. The rhythm of it all kept my mood light. Every sound in the lab felt steady again, predictable. By evening, the hum of the machines faded as the power regulators kicked down to idle. I shut off the lights and stood there for a moment, looking around the quiet workshop. Everything was stable again. I exhaled slowly, picked up my bag, and climbed the ladder to the surface. The sky above the city had turned dark, scattered with distant lights. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove off, feeling the tension drain away with every passing block. Chapter 16, Hammer at the Perimeter. I woke up late and felt good for once. The city sounded normal through the window: traffic, horns, people talking on the sidewalk. I made coffee, checked my phone, and scrolled through the messages. Nothing urgent. One text from Tony at 2 in the morning that said, "Don't break my sensors." I smirked and put the phone down. I headed to the tunnel after a quick shower. The ladder rungs were cool under my hands, and the air changed at the halfway point like always. The generator hum met me first, then the soft glow off the reactor baffles, then the stillness that meant everything was working. I walked past the benches and tapped the mech's shin with my knuckles as I went by. "Morning, big guy," I said cheerfully. The new coolant line I'd installed last night held pressure. The dampening field's output graph was a smooth line. No spikes. No loops. No broadcast weirdness. I let myself relax in small pieces and took a sip of coffee. I started routine checks. It wasn't glamorous work. I ran a hand along cable runs, tightened a bracket, inspected a stress weld on the left hip assembly. Every small fix felt clean. I liked this rhythm. It kept my head clear. Around 10, Pepper called. "Good morning," she said, brisk as always. "Morning, Pepper," I replied, bright. "Tell me we're not doing the Carlson dance again." "No," she said, sounding relieved. "Your report satisfied them. At least for now." He had a few follow-up questions that were more administrative than technical. "So, paperwork, not explosions," I said. "My kind of day." "Exactly," she said. I could hear her smile. Then her voice shifted. "I should tell you something. There's been chatter. Another defense contractor asked about a missing drone rumor. The timing lines up with Tony's sweep." I leaned against the console and frowned slightly. "Which contractor?" She paused. "Hammer Industries." I said nothing for a beat, then let out a breath and kept my tone light. "Of course it is. Justin Hammer hears a rumor and puts his nose in places it doesn't belong. Classic." "Tony dismissed it," she said. "I'm telling you because I know you like to be ahead of things." "I do," I said cheerfully. "Thanks." "Try to take the day easy," she said. "I'll keep you posted." We hung up. I stared at the reactor graph for a moment and thought through my calendar. Hammer was loud about his curiosity when he thought he could get away with it. He had money, not judgment. If he believed Tony was testing something near the industrial zone, he would start poking without asking permission. I put down the coffee and opened my perimeter console. The trap network showed green across all nodes. Passive mics, narrowband sniffers, non-reflective emitters, internal motion wires. All boring until someone made noise. "All right," I said to myself, cheerful but focused. "If you're coming, let's make sure you trip over the right thing." I adjusted the dampening field to a narrower cone around the core and opened a second layer, an interference mask that made the entire lab read like an old transformer vault. Not invisible. Boring. I set the outermost trap nodes to alert without countermeasures. If a drone came sniffing, I wanted to see it before I swatted it. The day stayed quiet. I fabricated 2 new actuator bushings, installed them, and recalibrated joint range. I swapped a minor pressure sensor that had been chirping. Lunch was a sandwich and a protein bar, eaten standing up with my back to a rack of welded manganese plating. Around 5, Tony called. "Eli," he said. "Status?" "Everything's chill," I said, leaning into the word. "Boring numbers and clean lines." "Your favorite?" "My favorite is you saying that and it being true," he said. I heard a quick clack of tools. Pepper mentioned Hammer. "Yeah," I said. "Got the update." "I'll stay alert." "Don't engage him," Tony said. "He wants attention. He buys attention. He's got lawyers who eat paper for breakfast and then email you about it." I laughed. "Relax. I'm not doing anything that ends with me in court. I'm just making sure my basement doesn't get filmed. Good, he said. Call me if you need me. Will do, I said. The line clicked off. I set the phone down and checked the time. Evening traffic would start overhead soon. The industrial zone drew a different crowd after dark, quiet workers, security trucks, people who didn't want to be noticed. If Hammer was sending anything, night was when it would come. I did another round of checks and then stood in front of the mech, hands on hips. All right, I said, cheerful and steady. We're going into watch mode. You get to rest. I get to babysit. I dimmed the lab lights and sat at the console with a headset on. The perimeter panels filled the screen. I set alerts to audible pips instead of loud alarms. No stress, just information. The generator cycled down to a low murmur. My pulse settled into a patient rhythm that meant I was ready but not tense. The first ping came at 8:12 p.m. Node C13 reported ultrasonic chirps in a pattern too clean for bats or rats. The waveform was machine-made, shallow amplitude, narrow sweep. A pilot scan. Not stark frequencies. Not SHIELD. The call sign embedded in the burst was generic. I grinned. Hi, Hammer, I said softly. A second ping hit C11. Then C9. The chirps mapped a careful arc along a storm drain 2 blocks out. Whoever was flying kept the probe just above the grating, then brought it down to test for reflections. Careful. Not sloppy. I gave a small nod he couldn't see. Someone competent was at the controls. I let it map. No reason to swat yet. The interference mask made the area look like old electrical infrastructure. The drone should pass to the next arc and log nothing interesting. At 8:24, the ping changed timbre. The probe switched tools, pushing a tight band microwave sniff. It was looking for heat leaks, reflective seams, and chatter off badly shielded gear. I braced an elbow on the desk and leaned forward. I toggled the outer layer of my mask to add random metallic noise. Old vaults do that. They bounce a little. The probe drifted closer to the maintenance shaft that led to my upper corridor. The mic picked rotor pitch low, balanced, almost silent. The drone itself was good tech. Hammer had paid for something better than the last generation. Going fancy, hey, I said under my breath. Okay. I kept hands off the countermeasures. If I hit it now, I would write my presence into its memory. If I stayed patient, I could learn its routine and pull it down later without a clean signature pointing here. It floated over the grate and hovered. The sniffers chirped again. My trap saw it. I let the mask carry it. The readings it got would show a cold tunnel, minor electrical drift, and the kind of static you get from corroded pipe joints. It moved on. I exhaled and shook out my shoulders. One good pass. No bite. At 8:47, a second drone arrived. Different pitch. The first stayed on a grid, methodical. The second cut diagonals. That made me smile without humor. 2 pilots. One cautious, one impatient. The impatient one tried an infrared spike at the far wall where an old service conduit used to run. My system caught it. I returned a smear that looked like a buried cable carrying little load. It took the bait and rode the length of the wall, then banked clumsily and clipped the grate with a ding my mic picked up clearly. Careful, I said, amused. It recovered. It did a slow loop and tried the shaft that gets closest to my ladder. That was an issue. I curled my fingers and tapped the desk gently. If it found the ladder cap, even masked, Hammer would have a reason to send people. I shifted posture and let the humor fall away. I kept my voice calm. Okay, I said. We're done letting you sniff. I cross-fed a decoy pulse 2 shafts north, just strong enough to look like gear warming back from idle. I timed it with cars passing overhead to keep the pulse masked in ambient noise. The cautious pilot drifted a probe that way. The impatient pilot hesitated a beat and then followed like a fish that didn't want to be bored. The drones moved. I held the decoy steady for 80 seconds, then ramped it down like a thermostat cycling. The drones started a slow circle. That was my opening. I put on work gloves, grabbed a handheld catcher, and jogged to the upper maintenance corridor. I stayed on the balls of my feet, kept my breathing quiet, and hugged the wall where the concrete absorbed sound. The corridor walls felt cool through the gloves when I touched for balance. The first drone came into view at the end of the shaft, a dark oval with soft blue eyes and a matte finish. It held a meter off the floor, scanned, and drifted right. The second approached behind it, jittery in its path. I pulled the catcher to my shoulder, switched it to net mode, and waited for the second to overtake the first in the tight corridor. When their arcs overlapped, I fired. The net shot forward, silent, fast, patterned with microcoils that ionized on impact. It hit both. The coils flared. The electronics stuttered. The drones sagged into the net's cradled shape like tired birds. I stepped forward fast, caught the net with my left hand, and pulled all three toward me in a smooth drag that made my shoulders burn. Their rotors spun once, then stopped. "Got you," I said, happy and quiet. I took them down the ladder and set them on the bench. They were smaller than Tony's recon line and a different build, extruded housings, off-the-shelf sensors upgraded by someone who knew what they were doing. I popped the hatches with a flat tool and looked at the boards. "Hammer money, third-party brains. Let's see who you really are," I said. I slid a drive into the first. The log opened. The last 5 minutes were segmented. The memory hadn't dumped yet. Perfect. I copied the raw blocks and then browsed the signature list. No Hammer branding, but a subcontractor string read Halcyon Vector Mk2 with a hardware key that pointed to a shell corp. I whistled softly. "Nice suit, ugly shoes," I said, amused. I wiped the logs back to the moment they turned the corner toward my decoy. I replaced everything after that with a long sequence of boring old power traces, dry air, cold pipes, nothing worth an expense report. For good measure, I added microbursts that looked like bad sensor alignment. Any analyst rushing would call it a bad night. On the second drone, I did the same. Then I added a breadcrumb, a faint echo near a decommissioned warehouse 6 blocks west where there really was an old transformer bay. It wouldn't hurt anyone. It would waste their time. It would keep them away from the ladder. I closed the housings, rebalanced the rotors by hand, and carried both drones back up. I walked the corridor slow, listened for anyone else, and felt the steady air on my face. At the grate, I set them hovering, pushed them up gently, and watched them climb back into their net. They drifted away like nothing had happened. I watched the node map as both pinged their sniffers in the wrong place and trundled west. I let out a breath I hadn't noticed I'd held tight. My shoulders loosened. I went back down and washed my hands at the small sink. I texted Tony, "Heads up. Non-Stark recon in the industrial zone. Not SHIELD. Could be hobbyists with money. I'll keep it contained. Don't send drones. It muddies things." A minute later, "You sure?" "Yeah. 2 units. Third party. I'll send you the Shell Corp name if you want to run it. Keep it off official channels." He replied with a thumbs up emoji, then, "Be careful. Hammer buys stupid and puts it in a box with a bow." I laughed and typed, "Copy." I checked the mech, wiped a smudge off the chest plate, and walked the perimeter a final time. Everything read normal. The mask held. The traps were quiet. I turned the lights up and sat to write a short note for myself: hardware keys, frequencies, Timings. I kept notes like that neat and boring in case anyone ever found them and decided to skim. I didn't list the mech anywhere. I didn't list the core. I listed maintenance, coolant line schedules, and pipe vibration checks. Easy to show. Hard to read into. At 10, Pepper called again. Eli, she said, sounding tired. Quick check. Anything new? Nothing I can't handle, I said cheerfully. Might be unrelated contractors sniffing around the zone. I'm keeping my head down. Do you need Tony? She asked. If I needed him, I'd already have him, I said. Promise. She was quiet for a second in a way that said she understood and didn't like it, but she trusted me anyway. Keep me posted. Always, I said. I hung up and leaned back. My smile held, but under it was a line of attention that didn't leave. This wasn't SHIELD. This wasn't Tony. This was a competitor with money playing with tools. If he kept sending drones, he might change pilots, change tactics, or try to put boots through a door. If that happened anywhere near people I cared about, I would stop being funny and solve it. I waited another hour. Nothing. The night settled. I packed the net, rolled the catcher cable clean, set the gloves aside, and killed the bench lights. I stood under the low glow from the reactor baffles and felt the warm air on my face. The mech looked steady. The lab was quiet. The world outside spun in its usual way. I climbed to the surface. The industrial street had gone still. Sodium lamps buzzed. A delivery truck rolled past slowly with its brake light half burned. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine for a minute. I let my hands rest on the steering wheel. They felt settled. I started the car and drove home on side streets. I didn't need main roads. I wanted the silence. My phone buzzed at a stoplight. A new number. One line of text, cute misdirect. We'll find the real site. I smiled at the screen, small and amused, and typed, good luck with the Transformer Museum. Tickets are sold out. The number didn't respond. I saved it anyway and flagged it to alert if it texted again. At home, I washed my hands till the grease lifted and the water ran clear. I microwaved leftovers and ate while standing by the window. The city never slept, but it had a rhythm. The rhythm tonight said I'd bought time. I got into bed with my phone face down on the nightstand. I lay still and let the last hour drain from my shoulders. No self-doubt. No panic. Just the next step lined up in my head, ready to go if someone pushed the wrong button. I slept hard. By mid-morning the next day, I was back in the tunnel tightening 2 bolts I'd marked last week and checking the interfere mask's randomization seed. I updated the table where the drone data sat, then encrypted the shell corp info and sent it to Tony with a subject line that said, "Trash with money." He replied with, "Hammer's fingerprints. Surprise level, 0. He added a second line, "Pepper wants to loop legal." I told her to hold for now. Your call if it escalates. I typed back, "Let's keep it quiet. If his toys break near my floor, I'll handle it and hand you the receipts." He sent a smirking face. I laughed out loud and went back to work. At noon, the traps chimed once. I checked the feed. Not a drone. A subcompact van parked 2 blocks down. 2 men got out with tool bags and hard hats. Fake utility badges. I sighed. It wasn't a deep sigh. Just a tired one. I called Pepper. 2 men with bags, I said. Utility cosplay. If they walk toward the wrong grate, they're not reading meters. She sounded tight and ready. Do I call security? Not yet, I said. I'm going up. I slipped on a work jacket with a local contractor patch I'd stitched on months ago, clipped a clipboard to my hand, and walked out the service door and down the alley like I belonged everywhere. I smiled when I met them. "Morning," I said happily. "You guys from District 3 or contractor side? This block's on hold while they test pressure upstream." They blinked. The older one covered fast. "Contractor. Call out for a check." "Funny," I said, flipping the empty clipboard page. "No call out on my list." "What's your contact?" He didn't have one. He said a name. It wasn't right. I held the smile. "You'll want to clear with dispatch," I said, nodding toward the corner. "If you open anything under Block 9 while they're testing, you'll blow a gasket and your day." They hesitated. They didn't like being turned. They also didn't want to meet a real inspector. "All right," the older one said. He made a show of checking his phone. "We'll reschedule." "Good plan," I said, cheerful. "Have a safe one." They got back in the van and left. I watched them go without moving my feet until the tail lights turned at the far corner. I waited another minute, then went back down the service door, closed it behind me, leaned my back to the cool metal for 5 seconds, and then went to the console. "Okay," I said, voice steady and light. "We're escalating protocols." I lowered the dampening cone tighter and activated a third-layer passive acoustic cancellation within 5 meters of the ladder and an injector that would throw an audible hum into any off-the-shelf mic near the shaft. I tuned it so it matched the road noise. It would be hard to filter out. I sent a short text to Tony, "Hammer moved to bodies. I turned them. If he tries again, I'll capture gear and send you a care package." He replied, "Kiss on both cheeks. Don't get arrested wearing a fake patch." I laughed and put the phone down. By late afternoon, all systems settled. The graph lines looked like they were bored. The mech stood quiet, lit by the steady glow. I decided to run a short maintenance diagnostic on the flight stabilizers just to finish the day right. I ran the code, listened for any unusual vibration, and found none. The numbers held. The board LEDs blinked in the right order. I exhaled and pushed the toolbox back to the wall with my foot. The phone buzzed once more. "That same unknown number, next time, don't touch private property. Risky move for a temp engineer." I smiled again. My thumb hovered for half a second over the keyboard, then typed, "Next time, pay your contractors better." They almost hit the wrong grate. Would have been a shame if they'd filed for workers' comp. No answer. I put the phone back on the bench and snapped the latches on the toolbox cleanly. The sound echoed in the space in a way that told me the room was the right temperature, because that's how my brain measures days now. I took one last look at the mech, patted the plating twice, and nodded. "We're fine," I said. It came out cheerful and calm. It matched how I felt. I shut the lights and climbed to the surface. Chapter 17, Monaco Sparks. 2 years moved the same way machines move when no one is watching. I kept building. I kept everything hidden. I added another chamber to the tunnel, then another after that. I split the reactor into redundant loops with independent seals so a failure in one would never touch the rest. I rewired the dampening field 3 separate times until it read as background noise on every scan I could simulate. I built a second mech frame and never told anyone. I tuned the stabilizers, improved the pulse cannon's cooling, and abandoned the missile pod in favor of something cleaner. I wrote a maintenance routine for everything and followed it like a calendar. Above ground, the world moved its way too. Tony expanded his suits. He smiled through interviews and said he had privatized world peace. He moved fast, laughed in front of cameras, then stayed up late in the lab making something work that shouldn't have worked yet. Pepper took over as CEO. She kept the company's spine straight while Tony made promises. She grew sharper, colder when she had to be, and still made space for what mattered. There was the Senate hearing, Justin Hammer grinning too wide while he tried to sell himself as a better Stark. There were questions about the arc reactor and defense contracts. Tony answered with sarcasm and facts and didn't compromise. People clapped outside and complained inside. The world liked him loud. The world also liked to corner him. I stayed out of it where I could. I helped where I needed to. I ran decoy projects at the surface lab so SHIELD could tick boxes and move on. I returned Hammer's curiosity with the kind of boring he couldn't sell to investors. I kept Tony out of the tunnel and kept the tunnel out of Tony. We worked fine that way. Today started with a text from Tony at 6 in the morning, Monaco. Wheels down at 10. Bring your face and a tie. It's a race day. I stared at the screen while I brushed my teeth and laughed quietly. Of course it is. I packed quick. The mech stayed asleep. The reactor stayed sealed. The dampening field stayed on a safe cycle with layered failsafes. I ran one last check, then grabbed a small kit tools, 2 compact devices I had no plans to use unless someone I cared about was about to be hurt, and a white noise badge tuned to public bands. I locked the tunnel behind me and took a car to the airport. The flight felt short. Monaco's light hit clean and hard. The Stark entourage moved like a practiced show: assistants, handlers, security, press. Happy met me at the car drop with a nod. He wore a suit that fit like he'd been talked into it. Eli, he said, relieved and dry. Good. You got the memo. I got it, I said cheerfully, straightening the tie I barely wanted to wear. How's the circus? He gave me a look. It's a circus. We walked fast through VIP corridors humming with people. The Monaco Historic Grand Prix always drew a crowd with money and cameras. Stark had a box at the track. The sound of engines loaded the air and vibrated in my chest. Pepper stood in the middle of the room taking a call and directing an assistant with one hand while the other pointed at a screen. She saw me and gave a small nod. Her hair was clean and sharp. Her eyes were focused and tired. Eli, she said, ending the call. Please tell me you don't have anything dangerous in that backpack. Only my good mood, I said with a grin. She didn't smile, but I saw her shoulders drop a fraction. Stay close. If Tony tries anything reckless, I want your eyes on it. That's a big net, I said lightly. But sure. Tony swept in a minute later in sunglasses and a suit that probably cost more than my car. He clapped Happy on the shoulder, kissed Pepper's cheek, and then turned to me with that grin that signaled he was about to do something ridiculous. You look presentable, he said. I'm proud. I try, I said. You're glowing. I don't trust it. He smirked. Come on. Enjoy the show. We moved to the balcony. Engines screamed past in tight lines. The heat from the track climbed into the box like a dry wave. Tony leaned over the rail and soaked it in like a man sizing up a toy. Pepper watched him watch the track and narrowed her eyes. Happy watched both of them and held his breath. Christine Everhart from Vanity Fair appeared in the doorway with Justin Hammer on her shoulder like a pet you keep around because he pays for dinner. Hammer tried to shake Tony's hand 3 times in 10 seconds. Tony gave him nothing but heat and smiled for the camera anyway. I stayed close, silent, taking it all in. My brain ran future minutes without trying. I knew what today was. Monaco. The race. The suitcase. The man with the whips on the track. Iron Man 2, starting at street level with an engine scream and a bad bet. It started with a small line of change. Tony glanced at the screen in the box. A driver exited a car and walked off. Tony's mouth curved in a way Pepper knew too well. No, Pepper said immediately under her breath. No. Tony handed her his sunglasses. It's my birthday, he said simply. It is not, Pepper replied sharply. Feels like one, he said. He was already walking. Tony, she said, moving to cut him off, absolutely. Happy, he called over her, get the car ready after. Eli, enjoy the show. Tony, Pepper said again, firmer. He just smiled and kept moving. He signed a waiver like it was a menu, pulled on a helmet, and slid into a car with the ease of someone who believes his own hands more than anyone else's voice. The crowd roared. Pepper's face tightened. Happy swore softly. I gave a small whistle. Okay, I said cheerfully, we're doing this. Pepper grabbed my wrist. Her grip was small and hard. If anything looks wrong, you tell me. I'm watching, I said. I meant it. The joking tone slid lower inside my chest and settled. I watched screens. I watched the track. I watched Tony. He took the start clean. He drove like he built the car, which he probably did in some way. It wasn't safe. It wasn't smart. It was very him. He cut inside on a straight and stole a position. Pepper glared at a screen like it had insulted her. Happy muttered about seatbelts he couldn't control. I scanned the pits, the stands, the perimeter. My eyes hit a man in a grey jumpsuit pushing a maintenance cart. He moved wrong for a worker. He didn't check anyone's face. He walked like he was late to something only he knew about. He pushed the cart through a gate a normal worker wouldn't use. My stomach went tight. There, I said, pointing. Pepper. Her eyes followed my finger. She saw him. She didn't know his name. I did. Ivan Vanko. The man with the arc whips and a grudge bigger than the track. He passed a wall camera and didn't look up. He pushed through a throat of bodies into the track route. Happy, Pepper said sharply, already moving, car. He was gone in 2 steps. She grabbed my sleeve. Come with me. Always, I said. We moved. The corridor out of the box and down toward the track twisted with people carrying drinks and cameras and money. Security tried to keep lanes clear. Pepper cut through bodies using the kind of authority money buys honestly. I stayed on her left and kept my eyes on exits. I saw Vanko step onto the track between turns. He wore the harness over the jumpsuit. He reached into the cart and brought out the spine. He clipped into his chest without fumbling. My jaw set. This was the moment. He pulled the whip spools out, locked them to his forearms, and then he powered the belt. Blue light crawled fast across the coils. The first whip flared to life and cut the first car in half like it was an easy job. The second whip flared and cut the next. Cars spun. Tires bounced. Metal flew in clean arcs. People screamed. Tony's car came around the turn and Vanko took a measured step forward. The whip bit and Tony's car cracked down the middle like glass. The noise came late. The front half flipped clean. The back half slid and threw sparks. Tony rolled, hit, rolled again, and came to a stop against the barrier. He moved. I breathed. Pepper flinched, her breath catching loud in the noise. Tony. Go, I said, already pushing her toward the stair. Happy. His car slid into view at the bottom of the stairs, nosed through a crowd like a bull with very good control. Get in, he yelled, voice sharp. Pepper didn't argue. She yanked the door handle and dove into the passenger seat. I grabbed the door frame and leaned in. You have the case. Happy didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the track. Trunk. Good, I said, simple and calm. I jerked my thumb west. Service lane that way. Gate 9 is chained but the latch is broken. 2 lefts and a right. He nodded once and floored it. Pepper clutched the dash with both hands, eyes wide and fixed forward. I shut the door and turned. I needed to buy seconds. I moved fast along a rail and jumped to the inside fence at a break in the crowd. Security saw me and moved to block. I flashed a laminated card with a real photo and a fake line. It worked because I looked like I belonged and because they had bigger problems to their left. I cleared a gap and dropped to a maintenance path that ran along the inside of the turn. The smell of oil and hot brakes was thick. Vanko stood in the middle of the track and let the whips hum and crack. He watched Tony crawl out of the car. His face was calm. He believed he had time. I pulled a compact device from my pocket. It was a portable grounding spike meant for overloaded conduits. I twisted it open and set it to dumb mode. I didn't point it at him. I planted it into the seam at the base of the barrier and kicked it once with my heel. The spike bit. The coil engaged. I set a second one 3 meters away. It wasn't a weapon. It was a drain. If he swung too wide at the barrier, the rings would pull just enough bite to keep arcs from jumping into the stands. A car skidded out and slammed the wall near my right. The impact hit my chest like a door. My legs bent and held. I kept moving. Tony stood, helmet off. He looked good for a man who just rolled in a car at speed. Vanko dropped one whip low and licked the asphalt with it. Tony's eyes tracked the movement like he was already calculating. He was buying time too. Happy's car burst through the service gate exactly where I said it would. He aimed for Vanko and did not stop. The car smashed into him and pinned him to the barrier. Vanko grinned and rolled with it. Happy kept it there under engine growl. Pepper jumped out with the suitcase and ran to Tony. Her hair stuck to her cheeks in sweat. Her hand shook once as she pressed the release. "Tony," she said, pushing the case into his hands. Her voice was too loud and too small at the same time. "I got it," he said. He opened the case. Panels shifted. The Mark V unfolded on his body, scale by scale, clean and fast. He pulled the faceplate down and set his feet. The crowd roared through fear and relief at the same time. It felt like an engine hitting a clean gear. Vanko tore free from the hood. Happy swore and hit him again. Pepper flinched and stepped back. I moved closer to the barrier and pulled Pepper by the elbow half a step toward cover without making a show of it. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded once, eyes glassy and locked on Tony. "Yes." Tony raised both hands and fired a pair of measured blasts. Vanko swung. The crack of the whips hit the air like an angry line. The armor took it with a flare and a grunt. Tony adjusted angle and power and learned Vanko in seconds the way he learns a machine. He drew him away from the crowd without making it look like he was yielding ground. I stayed at the barrier and watched the arcs. My grounding spikes drank a little with each strike that got too close. They held. The stands behind me stayed intact. People screamed and filmed and ducked. No one above me got hit by a stray whip. That was enough. Happy backed the car out to try again. Pepper shouted his name. He hit Vanko and pinned him anew. Tony stepped in and used the opening to go disciplined. He cut the whips from Vanko's arms with clean blasts, 1-2, and Vanko sagged under the weight of his own belt. He stood there panting, eyes on Tony, and then he laughed in a short, ugly way. He said something about blood. Tony froze a fraction and then sealed it up. Security swarmed. Monaco police moved in careful and became brave once they saw the whips were dead. They shouted orders. They cuffed Vanko's arms with something heavy. He didn't fight. He wanted to be seen. He looked satisfied and tired. He watched Tony the way a mechanic watches a failing part. Happy's hands were still clenched on the wheel when I reached him. He looked at me, eyes round. "You good?" I asked. He pulled in a breath and let it out slow. Yet. Pepper stood near Tony with her hand on his arm. He shook his head once, trying to tell her he was fine. She didn't buy it. She held on. She glanced at me and the look was clear, "Thank you and don't you dare say anything dumb." I raised my palms a little and stepped back. Christine Everhart stood a few feet away with her cameraman, trying to get a line. Justin Hammer hovered further back with his face pulled into something like concern and interest. I watched his eyes. He tracked Vanko like a man who understood a business opportunity when he saw one. I filed that away and kept it to myself. I retrieved my grounding spikes without anyone noticing. I twisted them closed and slid them into my jacket. No reason to leave extra questions lying around. I wiped a mark of grease off my wrist and looked again at Tony. He looked at the wreck of the car, then at the suit, then out at the track. He knew what this was now. Someone had found a way to mimic his work enough to hurt him. He didn't like it, and he wouldn't let it go. Paramedics checked a few drivers who had walked away with bruises. The track cleared. The noise thinned. The crowd remembered it had a schedule and started to move in the direction schedules tell people to move. Pepper turned to me with her jaw tight. "We're going to the hotel. Now." Tony didn't argue. Happy nodded and went to get the car. I stayed close without making it obvious. I wasn't going to be the reason anyone asked questions, but I wasn't going to leave Pepper to handle the weight alone. On the way out, Hammer tried to catch Tony again. "Crazy, right? Man with whips. You all right? Need anything? I can." Tony didn't slow. "I'm fine." Hammer shifted his smile to me like I could be bought with it. I gave him a bright cheerful look that did not invite conversation and kept walking. He stared at my back like he wanted to know what I knew and didn't. Good. We reached the car. Happy opened the door for Pepper first. She slid in and rubbed her hands together like she was cold even though the air was hot. Tony got in next. I stood outside the rear door and leaned down. "You need anything?" I asked, tone easy. "Yeah," he said, staring straight ahead. "Less idiots." "I'll see what I can do," I said. I tapped the roof twice. Happy drove. I stayed behind and walked the edge of the paddock until the crowds thinned. I checked the route where Vanko had entered. He had cut the chain with a clean bite. He had used the right gate. He knew exactly where to stand for impact. I took a picture of the damaged link for myself and then deleted it. No reason to carry stamps. Police vans left with Vanko inside. I watched one turn toward the main road and knew what was coming next. Hammer would get into the cracks where men like Vanko sit and make deals. He would make promises and think he had made a friend. He would not understand what a smart enemy looks like when it pretends to be a tool. That wasn't my problem today. My problem was making sure the people who mattered to me got to the hotel and didn't break on the inside. I bought a bottle of water from a stand and sat on a low wall in the shade. My hands were steady. My chest had that tightness that comes after you watch someone you care about climb out of something that should have killed them. I let it fade on its own. I texted Pepper, "You at hotel?" She replied, "Yes. He is okay. He says he is okay. Thank you." "Always," I typed. I tossed the empty bottle and took a cab away from the track. The city looked like it hadn't noticed what happened. Restaurants were full. Boats sat quiet in the marina. People took pictures. The world stayed busy the way it always does. Back at my small room, I set my phone on the table and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at my hands for a second and then stood again. I pulled out the two compact devices and set them side by side. I checked each for use marks. Both were clean. Good. The grounding spikes had light scuffs. I cleaned them and wrapped them in cloth. I put everything away correctly. I washed my face and stared at the water running off my jaw until my breathing was steady. Then I dried my hands and sat with my back against the wall. I let the events of the day line up in a neat row. Vanko would be in custody for a short time. Hammer would make his move. Tony would dig into palladium toxicity and try to pretend he wasn't digging in. Shield would nudge him toward a solution in their own way. There would be an expo. There would be drones in the sky that were not Iron Man. There would be a fight that would make the track look like a warm-up. I smiled a little. Okay, I said quietly. We're in it now. The phone buzzed. A text from Happy, he wants a burger. Figures. You good? Good, I wrote back. Tell him to drink water. Like he listens to anyone, Happy replied. I laughed out loud. Then I lay back, folded one arm over my eyes, and let my body uncoil for the first time since the whips lit. When I woke up an hour later, the sun was going down. The city lights started to come on in patches. I stood, rolled my shoulders until they popped, and ran my tongue across the back of my teeth like I was testing grounding. Everything felt fine. I grabbed my jacket and left for the hotel. In the lobby, I saw Natasha Natalie Rushman, today. She stood with her hands folded, watching a hallway with a calm I recognized. She looked at me once, assessed, then looked away with zero interest. That was her job. She was very good at it. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I went to the bar and ordered a coffee strong enough to keep my feet under me for another few hours. Pepper texted, he's resting. Don't knock. Won't, I wrote. Here if needed. I sat and sipped coffee and let people move around me. I didn't make plans about tonight. I made a list for tomorrow. I'd add a double layer to my dampening field back home just because my hands would want to work after seeing the whips. I'd fabricate a pair of small grounding spikes for Happy to keep in the trunk, labeled as tire tools. I'd send a one-line warning to Tony's private inbox about Russian engineering patterns that looked a lot like his father's blueprints, with no finger pointing. He'd read it. He might ignore it tonight. He wouldn't ignore it forever. I kept my voice light when Happy called and asked if I wanted to join them for food. I told him I'd eat later. I didn't push. I didn't ask to see Tony. Pepper needed quiet in that room more than she needed my jokes. I paid, left the hotel, walked to the water, and stood at the rail with my hands in my pockets. The air felt cool and clean. My head was loud and quiet at the same time. I didn't usually take things seriously, but when people I cared about could die, I didn't play around. Today reminded me why I carry tools I don't talk about and why I build things in rooms no one else gets to see. I went back to my room and slept light, the way you sleep when you are in a place that isn't yours but you're not leaving yet. Morning would come. The story would move. I'd keep my lab quiet. I'd keep my friends breathing. That was enough. Chapter 18, Tracks in Plain Sight. The morning after Monaco started with a short message from Pepper and an even shorter one from Tony. Pepper said, he's fine. He says he's fine. I know what that means. Keep your phone close. Tony said, whips. Great. Call me later. I read both while brushing my teeth, nodded at nobody, and put coffee on the stove. I flew back the same day. The tunnel felt grounded the second I climbed down the ladder. The generator's hum settled my nerves. The mech stood still in standby, cooling fans ticking softly. I ran my palm along the chest plate and breathed out, steady and slow. Back to work, I said cheerfully. I pulled the grounding spikes from my jacket, wiped them down, and shelved them. Then I opened 4 screens on the console at once, Monaco local police chatter, Port Authority logs, 2 off-book airfield manifests, and a keyword sweep across procurement requests that matched Hammer's purchasing patterns. None of these gave me direct access anywhere I wasn't allowed, but there was always publicly reachable noise if someone knew how to listen. Justin Hammer never did his own cleanup. He overpaid contractors who cut corners and left footprints. If he was going to get to Vanko in custody, he would do it by staging something ugly, filing something bland, and routing the body through a private gate. I started a timeline. Local lockup logs. Transfer requests. Ambulance runs. Back of house badges. I sat forward with a pen between my fingers and watched the lines fill in. At 11:22 a.m. Monaco time, a power fluctuation hit a small prison's secondary panel. Running water pressure dropped 2 minutes later. The generator spiked and died. Lockdown protocols tripped. A fire report hit dispatch 6 minutes after that. It had the right info and the wrong slang. I wrote that down and underlined it. A prison worker with a badge number tied to a contractor from last year made an out-of-cycle call. A body was logged. A name was tagged to it. I did not believe the name for a second. I said quietly, happy out of reflex and focused under it, "You bought yourself a fire, Hammer." I pulled footage from 2 blocks away traffic cams and one board security guard's camera on the corner of a bar. The ambulance left without sirens. It turned left at a light it should have taken straight. The street-level shot caught the edge of a gurney leg swinging too freely. I paused the frame and increased contrast until you could see the metal latches. Wrong model for the region. Imported. I wrote that down too. I hit call on Tony. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Tell me something good," he said, tired and sharp. "Vanko's not dead," I said cheerfully. "A very expensive accident just happened in a building that does not have expensive accidents. Ambulance went the wrong way. The paperwork smells like cheap cologne." He grunted. "Hammer. Feels like his flavor," I said. "You want the long version or the short?" "Short," he said. "I'm on 2 hours of sleep and a glass of ego. Contractor badge, staged outage, fake fire, wrong ambulance route, off-book transfer. Whoever wrote the logs doesn't know how the locals write dates," I said. "You'll get a news bite soon that says the suspect died in custody." He didn't. Silence. Then, softer, "Thanks." "You're welcome," I said. "Do you want me to sit on this and listen, or do you want me to poke it?" "Listen," he said. "If Hammer's involved, I want him thinking he's ahead. I'll handle him where it hurts." "Copy," I said. "Drink water." He almost laughed, then ended the call. I turned back to the console. The ambulance didn't head for a hospital. It went straight to the port. A private berth log with a newly issued permit had a company name that existed for exactly 11 days. The name matched a chain from a shell corporation I had seen on 2 of the drones I had pulled apart a year ago. I set an alert on that name in case it reappeared. I clicked through port camera angles until I found a view where 2 cranes blocked most of the frame and the timestamp jittered because someone never fixed it. That was usually the place where people felt safe doing dumb things. The ambulance backed up to a loading ramp. A tarpaulin was raised. 3 men stood in frame wearing 2 clean work boots. A 4th man wore a suit that didn't fit his posture. I took a still and zoomed the suit. Hammer's shoulder line was wrong. Not him. One of his executives. Close enough. They rolled a gurney up the ramp. The camera caught the edge of the tarpaulin lifting. Under the sheet you could see shoulder and hair wrong for Vanko. Someone else. Vanko was not on that gurney. He was already inside. I circled the timestamp and smiled to myself. By evening, the permit name that moved the ambulance at the port vanished and reappeared on a fuel invoice at an airstrip outside the city. The plane filed a flight plan toward a civilian airport in the States with a routing stopper list that felt too clever by half. I didn't bother trying to hack anything. I watched the noise and let bad paperwork talk. I made a sandwich, ate half of it, forgot the second half on the bench, drank water, and kept going. By the time the plane landed in New York, I had 2 possible endpoints for a ground transfer. One was a warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard with a private lease under a maintenance company. The other was a hangar near a small airfield Hammer had toured last year for a press shot he didn't get. I tagged both on my map and set the console to ding if any of my bait terms showed up nearby. I grabbed my jacket and 2 small cases. One had a throwaway camera with a clean chip. The other had a set of tiny adhesive tags that could be placed on a metal surface without broadcasting anything that looks like a tracker to standard sweeps. They piggyback on ambient radio noise until I decide to talk to them. No one will believe that sounds as boring as it is. I parked 3 blocks from the Navy Yard after midnight and walked the rest. The air was cold and smelled like rain was coming. The lot lights cast harsh circles on the pavement. A white van with 2 shiny tires sat near a service door. A man smoked across from it and tried to look relaxed. His shoes looked wrong for a long shift. He checked his phone and tried to hide it when a camera turned. I smiled and kept my eyes low. I walked the perimeter once, not hugging the fence and not moving like a tourist. I carried a clipboard and wore a good jacket. People ignore a person who looks like they expect to be there. I stopped once in the shadow of a pillar and adjusted a shoelace so the security camera caught me as a harmless shape bending over. When I straightened, I placed 1 adhesive tag on the inside lip of a ventilation grate and pressed until it clicked. The click was tiny. I felt it in my fingertip and moved on. At the hangar, the door cracked open as I approached the end of the fence line. 2 men pushed a rolling case the size of a coffin. A third held the door. The last one wore the wrong haircut for a night shift and the right arrogance for a man who thinks his paycheck came with immunity. Hammer had sent people who believed they weren't doing anything wrong. Those are the worst kind. They get surprised when the world says otherwise. I didn't linger. I rounded the block and ghosted past the corner where the fence meets a dead hedge. I placed a second adhesive tag under a floodlight bracket. I put my hands in my pockets, kept walking, and did not look back. By the time I got home, the console already had the tag's first ping. It showed motion inside the Navy Yard at 3:11 a.m., a door opening and closing, then no movement for 20 minutes. At 3:44, the hangar pinged with the same pattern. They were moving between 2 sites to obfuscate the path. Sloppy confidence. Not terrible, not careful. I slept 2 hours on the cot, woke to the generator's cycle check, and brewed coffee while the feeds scrolled. Pepper texted, "Legal is gagged. Be careful." "Always," I sent back. By noon, the hangar lit up again. A private security firm, one of Hammer's regular rentals, clocked in 2 extra guards without logging their names. A plain box truck backed up to the loading bay and stayed there for an hour without power hooked up. It left and the Navy Yard pinged 10 minutes later. Back and forth games. At 2:09 p.m., my tag recorded a wait shift on the hangar door's wind brace and a short-range anemic radio handshake I had seen once before on a high-value prisoner transfer. I sat forward. 30 seconds later, a car entered frame with plates that traced to a management company that did not exist until last week. The passenger in the back seat wore handcuffs. He had a mop of dark hair, a posture of someone who had not slept. Ivan Vanko stepped out of the car with his wrists bound, grinning at no one. I felt my jaw set, then loosened it. "Hello again," I said to the screen. He was thinner than Monaco made him look. He moved steady anyway. He didn't limp. He scanned the space once, not looking for cameras, looking for exits. A man in an off-the-rack suit with a red tie walked up and extended a hand as if he was welcoming a guest to a club. Justin Hammer wore enthusiasm like a sticker. He was trying to look like the smartest person in the room while standing next to a very dangerous person he did not understand. Hammer shook Vanko's hand with both of his. Ivan did not squeeze. He stared at the suit, then at the building. He didn't say much. Hammer talked the whole time. I turned the volume up and caught half a sentence here and there off the edge of a mic. Money, resources, expo, drones. Hammer loved the word drones. He said it the way a kid says rocket ship. I breathed in through my nose and let it out. I called Tony again. Talk to me, he said without hello. He's in a hangar tied to a shell. Hammer's courtship is clumsy, I said. They're making space for him at the Navy Yard too. 2 sites. 1 brain. Tony's breath made a small static noise on the line. Where? I read him the address. He didn't say anything for a moment. He said, calmer than his breathing, I'll handle Hammer. Don't put yourself in it. I'm already in it, I said cheerfully. But I'm not going to start any fires. I'm gathering proof and building something you'll thank me for later if he decides to fly his mistakes at people. Good, he said. And thanks. No problem, I said. I want you breathing. He hung up. He does that when he means it and doesn't want to say the rest. I printed stills, made copies, and filed them in a folder marked with a boring name. I saved the raw feeds twice. I encrypted them once. Then I opened a new project file titled Stark Expo Counter Kit and started pulling parts from bins. I laid 3 things on the bench. The first was a drone snare, an updated version of the net I used on Hammer's recon units 2 years ago. This one deployed from a small canister and projected microcurrent loops through a mesh that shuts down a flight controller without frying it. It was clean, legal to carry if I slapped a safety device stamp on the casing, and brutal on any quad that got too close. The second was a repeater jammer that only came to life when it heard a Hammer drone hand shaking on a set of narrow, lazy bands. Stark's comms lived in a sharper, encrypted space. S.H.I.E.L.ds sat on their own platforms. Hammer's low-bid engineers used the same handful of chips across their product line and never changed the defaults. I had recorded the handshake off the recon drones. I tuned my jammer to greet that handshake and lull the drone to sleep. The third was a passive clamp that latched onto a metal chassis with preloaded magnets and used a piezoelectric jolter to kick open service panels without leaving pry marks. It would give me access to a drone arm or a leg for a cut in a tight window. Not elegant. Effective. I worked for 4 hours without stopping. The kit came together clean. The snare folded into a belt holster. The jammer fit in a pocket. The clamp looked like a flashlight. I smiled, small and pleased. I sent Pepper a message, if the expo gets noisy, I have crowd-safe counters. No boom. All non-lethal. I will not use them unless you or Happy tell me people are in danger. Her reply came a minute later, thank you. I kept my head down and did not add anything else. At dusk, the hangar tag chimed again. Vanko walked to a workbench under guard and looked over a pile of parts. He waved a hand. 2 guards moved the pile aside. He pointed to the corner where Hammer's people had stacked 10 gleaming armatures with cheap servos and brittle wiring. He laughed once. I couldn't hear it, but I knew the face. He pulled a marker from his pocket and drew something fast on a box. A circle with projections. It wasn't a reactor. It was his version of a control scheme. He was going to call them drones. He was going to build something else. Hammer leaned in and nodded too quickly. He talked fast and said the word Army and Navy and Air Force and Marines because he wanted to sell branches as a product set. He thought presentation was the prize. Vanko thought function was the prize. They were both wrong about different things. I made myself eat the second half of the sandwich. It tasted like cardboard. I did it anyway. Around 9, Happy called. You busy? He asked. Always, I said. You, too. Pepper is on her third phone, he said. Tony's not talking to anyone about Monaco. He's building. If I had to guess, he's building angry. Good, I said. He's better when his hands move. You got a read on that Russian? He asked, quiet. He's alive, I said. He's working for someone he doesn't respect. He will give them exactly what they deserve. Happy snorted. That sounds bad, man. It is what it is, I said cheerfully. Keep the case close. You always say that, he said. It's close. Good, I said. Call me if he coughs. I'll bring water. Happy laughed under his breath. You're a piece of work. I try, I said. I slept 4 hours and woke to the buzz of a cheap fluorescent bulb cycling in the outer corridor. The tags pinged. Vanko went from hangar to Navy Yard and back twice. A Hammer executive delivered a briefcase. Vanko opened it, took nothing, and pushed it back. The executive left it anyway. I took a still of the man's face and ran it through a basic search. His name attached to a project at Hammer Industries called Exoclad. I wrote that down next to a note that said buyer's remorse later. By noon the next day, I had 6 clips and a set of time-coded notes. I put them on a small drive and labeled it Tiles. I don't like cute names for evidence. I like words I can say in public without attention. I drove to Stark Industries under a calm sky. Security waved me in. Jarvis greeted me in the elevator, polite and concise. The doors opened on the workshop. Tony stood near a table with the Mark VI on a rig. He didn't look at me at first. He worked a bolt loose with a precise twist and set it aside. His jaw said he hadn't slept much. His eyes said don't ask. I put the drive on the table next to his coffee and kept my tone light. Tiles. Don't open it on a network. It's clean. It's also spicy. He glanced at the drive, then at me. How spicy? Port logs, ambulance path, hangar stills, visitor list, handshake patterns, I said. Hammer has him and thinks he has a friend. He has a problem. Tony's mouth pulled in a way that wasn't a smile. He picked up the drive and rolled it once between his fingers. Thanks. Don't thank me yet, I said cheerfully. He's working there. It looks like drones. It won't just be drones. Copy, Tony said, flat and focused. He slid the drive into a safe in the wall and turned the key. I'll handle Hammer. Good, I said. I looked at the armor. The new triangle piece stared back. He caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. I lifted my hands. I didn't say anything. He smirked, the first sign of real humor on his face today. You never say anything. That's because I'm smart, I said. Also, I came bearing gifts. What gifts? He asked, curious but wary. Non-lethal drone counters for crowded places, I said. No explosions. Nets that taste the brain, sleepy time repeaters for bargain bin comms, and a clamp that opens panels without scratching paint. I tilted my head. No Stark tech inside. All mine. Not for sale. He grunted acknowledgement. Pepper will like that you thought about people not dying. I always think about that, I said. The cheer stayed, but the tone under it didn't move. It matters. He nodded once, then picked up a wrench again, already moving to the next part. All right. Keep your head down. I'll be loud enough for both of us. I know, I said, smiling. It's your brand. I left him to it and went home. The tunnel smelled the same as always: metal, oil, air a little too dry. I checked the dampening field, changed a filter, and stood in front of the mech's left shoulder. I tightened a casing screw that didn't need tightening. It calmed my hands. The tags pinged through the afternoon. Vanko got a deeper lab table. Hammer brought in a set of arm wrap servos that made me wince. Too fragile for load, too cheap for stress. Vanko didn't care. He unscrewed 3 and kept the casing. He had his own plan. I wrote down the serial numbers anyway. He would reuse what was good. He would toss what wasn't. At sunset, Pepper called. "Are you safe?" she asked without preamble. "Yes," I said cheerfully. "In my happy hole." She exhaled. "Good. Keep it that way. There's a lot." "I know some of it," I said. "You don't have to tell me unless you want to." "Thank you," she said. She paused. Her voice softened a fraction. "Also, thank you for the thought about the expo. I'll have security loop you in under a volunteer role. If anyone asks why you're there, you're checking lighting cables. You won't get a badge. You'll get a wristband." "Perfect," I said. "I love wristbands. They make me feel young." That got a short laugh out of her. "Take care." "You too," I said. I ate, cleaned the bench, and sat with the console at eye level. The night moved. The tags pinged on schedule. I watched and let my brain stay calm in the face of the obvious. Hammer was going to put Vanko on a stage he thought he controlled. Vanko was going to flip the table and show him what control looked like. I wasn't going to change that. I wasn't on their stage. I was building railings and nets where I could. At midnight, the hangar cameras showed Hammer walking alongside Vanko, smiling and pointing at a wall of concept art his people had printed. Vanko didn't look. He was measuring the room with his eyes and counting exits. He had half a dozen parts in his hands and a mind that had no interest in the posters. I closed the feed and stood. I turned the mech's status panel over in my hands and checked the screws again. I didn't usually take things seriously, but when people I cared about might land in the path of someone else's ego, I got serious without saying it out loud. I set my alarm, killed the overhead lights, and sat on the cot with my back against the cool wall. The generator's cycle drifted lower by a notch. The mech's indicator lights bumped once, then steadied. I breathed in through my nose and let the day go. Tomorrow I would test the snare on a junk quad. I would tune the jammer to refuse everything that carried the Lazy Hammer signature. I would call Happy and tell him where the best emergency exits at the expo were because I knew he'd memorize them. I would send Pepper a calm line about building redundancy into the stage rigging because that would help her sleep. Then I would listen. Chapter 19, Cliffside Calibration. The air in Malibu always felt different. It smelled clean, sharp with salt, and just faintly like metal. The stark cliff house looked the same as always from the outside: glass walls, sunlight, ocean below, but the inside never stayed the same for long. Tony was always rearranging, upgrading, or breaking something important. I got there just before sundown. The garage door rolled up, and Jarvis's voice came through the speaker. "Good evening, Mr. Eli. Mr. Stark is expecting you." "Hey, Jay," I said cheerfully. "Don't tell him I brought snacks. I want to surprise him with the concept of basic nutrition." "Noted," Jarvis replied dryly. I stepped in. The smell of oil, solder, and ozone hit me right away. Tony was bent over a work table with the Mark VI armor open at the chest, an arc reactor glowing faintly in its socket. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, pushing up the tinted glasses on his face. "Eli," he said. "You made it. You're punctual. I'm not sure how to process that." I try to keep my professionalism balanced with my charm, I said, smiling as I dropped my bag onto the nearest stool. You said you needed help with testing, so here I am. I brought chips. He smirked. Good. I've been running on caffeine and fear for 12 hours. I opened the bag and tossed him a handful. Breakfast of geniuses. He caught a chip, bit into it, and pointed at my bag. You brought your toys. Always, I said cheerfully. I unzipped the bag and pulled out the compact snare canister, the repeater jammer, and the magnetic clamp. I placed them neatly on his workbench next to the half-disassembled gauntlet. Tony raised an eyebrow. You really weren't kidding. They look clean. They are clean, I said proudly. Built them to stop Hammer's drones without turning anyone into barbecue. He nodded slowly, chewing the rest of the chip. Show me. Patience, I said, walking toward the cliff doors. The wind was strong, cool, carrying that deep hum from the ocean below. Outside, Tony. Let's give your fancy lawn some excitement. He followed, amused. You know this isn't a lawn, right? It's a landing pad. It's a flat piece of land with no grass, I said happily. That's a lawn in California. We stepped out onto the platform. The sun was just touching the horizon, orange light reflecting off the armor frames hanging from the ceiling. Tony clapped his hands once, and one of the training drones floated up from a nearby rack. All right, he said, rolling his shoulders. Target drone 4. Minimal countermeasures, live hover, 30% velocity. Let's see what your toys do. The drone rose higher, stabilizing. Its sensors glowed faintly blue as it locked onto Tony. I crouched down, holding up the canister. This one's the snare, I said cheerfully. Fires a net with microcurrent loops. It shuts down control systems by overloading short-range capacitors. No explosion, no mess. Sounds fun, Tony said. You tested it? Yeah, I said. On pigeons. Kidding. He smirked. Fire away. I aimed at the drone, thumbed the safety off, and pulled the trigger. The net shot out fast, spinning in a clean spiral before snapping open. It hit the drone dead center. There was a soft electrical pop, a brief flicker of blue light, and then the drone dropped like a rock. It hit the pad with a dull thud. Tony whistled. That's actually impressive. Jarvis. Drone 4's systems are inactive, Jarvis confirmed. Power surge detected on control node. No permanent damage. See? I said, smiling. Safe. Effective. Environmentally friendly. Tony crouched beside the drone and poked one of the net coils. How long does it stay down? 5 minutes before auto reset, I said. Or until you pull the net off. He nodded, impressed. You built this in your cave. Workshop, I corrected. Cave is rude. I have power tools and snacks. He grinned. All right, what's next? The repeater jammer, I said. I picked up the small square device. This one listens for Hammer's communication bands and returns a lazy handshake that makes the drone think it's still talking to home base. Basically, it convinces the drone it's fine while it forgets what it was doing. Like a firmware lobotomy, Tony said. Exactly, I replied cheerfully. Let's test it. He gestured, and another drone rose into the air. Drone 5. Same parameters. I flicked the jammer's switch. The small blue light blinked once, then turned green. The drone started to move, but its path went erratic. It drifted left, right, then hovered midair and spun in slow circles. Tony watched, smiling faintly. You just made it stupid. I prefer the term docile, I said. He crossed his arms. Hammer's drones would never survive this. They weren't built to survive anything, I said. They were built to look impressive for investors. He grunted, half a laugh and half something else. Yeah. Sounds like Hammer. The jammer's light faded after a minute. The drone powered down smoothly and landed itself near the first one. Tony leaned closer, inspecting both. "You're not hiding Stark tech in there?" he asked. "Nope," I said happily. "All mine. Homebrew, open source, and probably illegal somewhere." "Nice work," he said sincerely. "Thanks," I said, genuinely pleased. "The last one's the clamp." He raised an eyebrow. "What does it do?" "It opens up panels without leaving scratches," I said. "I built it because I hate screwdrivers." He laughed. "Of course you did." I stepped forward, clicked the magnetized clamp onto the drone's arm, and twisted the handle. The piezoelectric jolt clicked twice, and the access panel popped open. Tony's eyes followed every movement. "That's clean," he said. "You really thought this through." "I didn't want to carry a crowbar," I said cheerfully. He chuckled again, but then his eyes flicked toward the arc reactor glowing under his shirt. He adjusted his posture and looked away. The moment was small, but I saw it. His hand brushed the edge of the reactor absently, a habit he didn't even notice anymore. I kept my tone light. "So, how's your new design holding up?" "The triangle looks good." "It's better," he said simply. "Cleaner power curve. Doesn't poison me." "That's a solid feature," I said. "Staying alive really ties a person together." He cracked a grin. "You're a riot." "Someone has to keep morale up," I said, smiling. He stood, stretching his shoulders. The armor behind him gleamed in the dim light. "All right. Let's see if your jammer interferes with Jarvis's network. J, run a spectrum scan on the local bands." "Scanning," Jarvis said. A pause followed. "Mr. Stark, interference detected on secondary control channels." Tony frowned. "Show me." A holographic graph appeared in the air, lines dancing in patterns. I recognized them immediately. My jammer's signal sat right in the middle of the Expo's planned communication frequency. "Ah," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "That's not ideal." Tony gave me a look. "You realize the Expo runs on that band?" "I do now," I said. "In my defense, I built this before the Expo existed." He sighed and waved the graph away. "All right, not a big deal. Just retune it. We can move it off those frequencies." "Sure," I said cheerfully. "Give me 10 minutes." He gestured to the workbench. "Tools are yours." I sat down and pulled open the jammer's casing. The components were neat, precise, but I'd built them fast. I started switching out the microcontroller's default frequency map for a cleaner segment of the spectrum. Tony stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. "You know," he said after a minute, "you could make good money selling this." I smiled without looking up. "I don't build to sell, Tony. I build because my brain gets bored." "Fair," he said. "Still, it's impressive work." "Thanks," I said, tightening a screw. "You should see my mech." He smirked. "One day you're gonna show me that thing." "One day," I said lightly. He didn't press. He respected lines when he wanted to. Jarvis interrupted. "Updated test drone prepared." "All right," Tony said. "Let's see if you fixed your mess." "Confidence, Tony," I said cheerfully, setting the jammer back on the table. "You've got to believe in me." "I believe in you about 70%, he said. Maybe 75 if this works. I flicked the switch. The drone took off. The jammer hummed once, then quieted. The holographic graph stayed flat. Jarvis spoke again. No interference detected. Tony nodded, satisfied. Nice recovery. I do my best, I said with a grin. He turned toward the sunset, arms resting on the railing. You ever think about joining officially? Work under the Stark name? I could use someone who actually listens when I talk. I leaned on the railing beside him. You'd have to pay me in snacks and sarcasm. Done, he said immediately. I laughed. Tempting. He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the ocean. The wind blew through his hair, and for a second he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. I knew that look. I'd seen it after Afghanistan, after Monaco. When things hit close to home, Tony didn't rest, he just built faster. You know, I said quietly, you don't have to do everything alone. He didn't look at me, but his voice was softer. Yet. I know. The sound of waves below filled the pause. Then he straightened, brushing off the moment like dust. All right, emotional quota met. Back to science. Right behind you, I said cheerfully, following him inside. We ran another hour of tests, this time integrating the jammer into a portable array. Tony kept tinkering, adding small adjustments. He worked with that same intensity he always had, focused, precise, restless. Every now and then he muttered under his breath, small calculations or complaints about tolerances. At one point, he burned his finger on a live lead. He swore. I handed him a wet cloth without comment. He grinned and said, "Thanks, Mom." "Don't make me ground you," I said. By the time the tests finished, it was dark outside. The drones sat in neat rows on the pad, power lights glowing faintly. The air smelled faintly of ozone and heat. Tony wiped his hands on a rag, looking at the results scrolling across the main monitor. "Jarvis," he said. "Report." "All countermeasures tested successfully," Jarvis said. "No network interference detected. Efficiency rating 98%. Tony smiled. "Not bad for a night's work." I stretched my arms. "See? My toys play nice." He looked at me, grin returning. "You're all right, Eli." "I know," I said happily. He laughed. "Get out of here before I put you on payroll." "Can't afford me," I said cheerfully, grabbing my bag. He followed me to the elevator. The glass doors closed, and the platform started to rise. Tony leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You sure you're not hiding Stark-level tech in that head of yours?" "I just watch too much TV," I said with a smirk. He shook his head. "You're dangerous." "I'm friendly dangerous," I said. "Big difference." When the elevator reached the top, the doors opened to the cool night air. I stepped out, bag slung over my shoulder. Tony stopped in the doorway. "Hey," he said. "Thanks for the help." "Anytime," I said cheerfully. "Just call when you need more nets or sarcasm." He chuckled. "Noted." The doors slid shut, and the elevator dropped out of sight. I walked to my car, the ocean wind tugging at my jacket. The headlights caught the edge of the cliff, waves crashing below. My mind was calm, steady. Tony would be fine for now. The tech was ready. The expo was coming. I got in the car and started the engine. The dashboard glowed faint blue. I pulled out of the driveway and headed down the coast road, humming softly to myself. The night was quiet except for the engine and the waves. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A message from Pepper, "Thank you for keeping him focused. Try to get some sleep." "I'll think about it," I typed back. The tunnel was dark when I returned. I turned on the lights, the familiar hum filling the space. The mech stood where I left it, cables neat, panels clean. I unpacked my tools, checked the charge on the jammer, and set it on the workbench. Good day, I said aloud, mostly to myself. Nobody died, Tony's still funny, and my stuff works. The generator cycled down for the night. I sat on the cot, leaning back against the wall, hands resting on my knees. I smiled quietly. The next few weeks would be busy: the expo, Hammer's stunt, Vanko's designs, but that could wait until tomorrow. The hum of machines filled the silence. My eyelids felt heavy. I kicked off my boots and stretched out on the cot. The air smelled like warm metal and oil. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the generator steady my breathing until everything went quiet. Chapter 20, Inspections and Quiet Warnings. I got the message from Tony at 7 in the morning. It was short and brisk, like he typed it while walking across the lab. Be here by 9. Bring the boring boxes. We've got company. I texted back, which boxes? And he replied, the ones that make other boxes stop misbehaving. That was his way of asking for the jammers and one snare. I packed them without a second thought, slung the bag over my shoulder, locked the tunnel, and caught the first elevator up to the street. The drive to Stark Industries took less than half an hour. The sky was clear. The air felt dry. I kept the radio off and let the engine fill the space. When I reached the side entrance, security waved me in with a bored nod. Everyone here knew me by now. I looked like I belonged, which was the only uniform that mattered. Jarvis let me in the elevator before I pressed a button. Good morning, Eli. Morning, Jay, I said cheerfully. How's your signal health? Stable, he replied. Mr. Stark has prepared a test plan for suit energy stability. He did not write it down. Of course he didn't, I said, smiling. The doors opened into the main workshop. The room was bright, spotless, and arranged like a person lived here more than they slept. The Mark VI stood on a rig near the center. Armor plating looked tight. The new triangular reactor sat clean and centered. Tony stood with his back to me, rolling a socket wrench in his hand while he squinted at a screen. He wore a black shirt and the kind of focus he put on only when he had 10 ideas at once and time to try to. Hey, I said, setting my bag on the nearest table. You called for professional assistance and questionable snacks. He pointed the wrench at a small brown bag I'd tucked into the side pocket. If those are pretzels, I forgive last week's jokes. They're protein bars, I said cheerfully. You'll live longer. He groaned. Always with the health evangelism. Fine. You can stand here as long as you don't throw kale at me. I grinned. Deal. A second set of footsteps tapped across the floor. I turned. Natalie Rushman walked in from the far hall wearing a simple blouse and dark skirt. Her red hair was tied back. She had a folder under her arm and a badge on a lanyard. Her expression was polite and unreadable. She looked at Tony first, then at the suit, then at me. Good morning, she said evenly. Tony waved at her without turning. Natalie, he said. Welcome to the happiest place on earth. Try not to sue me. She didn't blink. I'm not here to sue you. He smirked. Yet. I gave her a small nod. Eli, I said. Independent contractor and full-time electrician whisperer. Noted, she said, meeting my eyes for a moment. Her handshake was brief and steady. She moved past me to the armor rig and opened the folder. Per our arrangement with Ms. Potts, she said, professional and calm, I'm here to observe safety testing on non-explosive systems, confirm energy stability within acceptable thresholds, and log any anomalies that could affect public demonstrations. She looked at Tony. I'm an observer. Not an obstacle. Tony held out a hand like a person asking for a tool. I tossed him the torque wrench. He caught it without looking. Great. Observe me succeeding, he said. Jarvis, bring up the power curve overlay. A soft projection appeared against the far wall, lining out energy load, coolant rates, and a dozen lines that told a story only 3 people in the room wanted to read. Tony twisted a fastener on the reactor mount and stepped back. He glanced at Natalie's folder. You don't need to write down my jokes, he said. But you should. I'll keep my notes efficient, she said coolly. I unzipped my bag and laid out the countermeasures in a neat row. The square repeater jammer. The canister snare. The clamp. I kept my hands busy without making noise. My head was awake and light. Tony snapped 2 latches on the chest plate and looked to me. We're running a load soak, he said. 30% baseline, 60% spike, hover for 5 seconds, then hard dump to 20. I want to see if the new inlets choke under speed. Got it, I said. I'll watch coolant and return heat. He nodded, sliding the chest plate into place. Natalie stood 3 steps back, face calm. She watched his hands, not just his words. She watched the timing. She watched me watch the screens. Her eyes tracked everything. Jarvis, Tony said, lock the bay. Bay locked, Jarvis said. The doors sealed with a small mechanical sound. The air grew still. Tony stepped into the suit rig and let the frame close around him. The armor sealed like it had been built to do exactly this and nothing else. He rolled his shoulders once and cracked his neck. Okay, he said. No fireworks. Please, Natalie said, dry. I stepped to the console and split the display into 3 parts so I could watch flow, pressure, and jitter on the distribution bus. Baseline ready, I said. Tony raised a hand, pointed at a dummy target near the far wall, and nodded. Run it. I dragged my finger across the power slider. The reactor responded without lag. The line on the projection rose smoothly. Coolant flow followed. Pressure held. Tony took 1 step, then another. The suit moved clean. 30, I said, eyes on the line. Hold. Feels good, he said. Spike. I pushed it to 60. The line climbed. Coolant lagged a half second, then caught up. I marked it with a small dot. The suit's feet slid a fraction on the clipped metal floor and then stuck. Tony lifted off the ground 2 feet and held it. The reading trembled around a small band. Hover stability within margin, I said. Drop. I pulled power to 20. The distribution jittered for a breath, then settled. I watched the minor aftershock in the coolant loop smooth out. The return heat numbers held better than last week. I smiled without thinking about it. Not bad, I said. You fixed the choke near the intake. Finally, Tony said through the exterior mic. I told you it was the flange. Natalie watched his boot touches and the slow roll of his shoulder joint. She didn't miss the smallest movement. Any concerns? She asked, eyes flicking between Tony's mask and my screen. No, I said cheerfully. You'll be fine on stage if he stays under sustained 90. I do not recommend sustained 90. Noted, she said. Tony sat down gently and rotated his wrist. Let's see a shield throw, he said to himself. Jarvis, warm target 2. Target warming, Jarvis replied. A dull metal panel slid up from the far wall. Hold, I said mildly, not changing tone. Run a seal test first. I want to clear one doubt. Tony turned his helmet slightly. I could feel him watching me, even if I couldn't see his eyes. What doubt? He asked. Minor seal creep on left clavicle, I said. It won't break. It will squeak. He grunted. I hate squeaks. He flicked a maintenance menu open and ran the suit's built-in seal compression. The small movement looked like nothing. The numbers smoothed on my side. Better, I said. Natalie wrote one clean line in her folder. She did not look smug. She didn't look impressed. She logged it like every part of this was just work. All right, Tony said, lining up his stance. Throw. He fired a controlled repulsor shot. The target shuddered. The projection flashed for a second, then normalized. Return heat spiked, then dipped. I circled it gently on the console and moved on. Natalie glanced up at the distant blast mark and then at the pressure draw. She didn't ask questions she didn't need. We ran half an hour of simple tests like that. Boosts, short bursts, controlled hovers, rotational shifts, unloads, and small re-engagements. Tony kept the jokes to a low simmer and focused on the numbers. Natalie didn't interfere. She asked one or two necessary questions and logged answers with shorthand. I kept my tone cheerful and my hands steady on the sliders. When Tony finally stepped out of the rig, he rolled his shoulders and shook out one hand. He looked tired, in the way you look after real work, not the way you look after pretending. He pulled the helmet off and set it on the bench with care. All right, he said to Natalie, do I pass? She closed the folder. For this, she said, yes. He smiled in a way that showed relief and irritation at the same time. Great. Tell your boss I'm not a walking hazard. I won't say that, she said calmly. I'll say the test passed. He smirked. Semantics. Accuracy, she said. He waved a hand. Okay, accuracy officer, what's next on your invisible checklist? She didn't answer that. She turned to me instead. I need Mr. Eli to run his devices again, she said. One at a time. I want to confirm they don't echo into Stark's networks now that you've tuned them. I pulled the repeater jammer into my palm and held it up. Green light means it's happy, I said. If it goes red, I unplug it. No drama. Tony pointed at the drone rig. Jarvis, Drone 7. Non-critical sensors, sandbox network. Confirmed, Jarvis said. The drone rose. It made no sound other than the light hum of rotors. I flicked the jammer on. The light stayed green. The drone drifted, then hovered. The projection stayed flat. Jarvis spoke after 3 seconds. No interference. Good, Natalie said, marking it. I shut it off. Snare next, I said. No power spikes to your grid. Tony stepped aside and folded his arms. Don't break anything that belongs to me. Would never, I said cheerfully. I aimed and fired. The net blossomed, snapped, and wrapped the drone without a bounce. It shut down and hit the pad with a small clunk. Nothing else blinked. Natalie nodded once. Clean. She set down her pen and looked at Tony. Ms. Potts will appreciate that he brought these. Tony flicked his eyes at me. He's good for something. I am good for many things, I said, picking up the net and coiling it with quick hands. You should make a list. I'll make a list of your flaws, he said, sipping water. It will be shorter. You say the sweetest things, I said, laughing. Natalie kept her face neutral, but the corner of her mouth inched like she was suppressing a smile. She clicked the folder closed with a neat motion. I'm finished for now, she said, eyes flicking between us. Thank you for the transparency. Don't say that word near my lawyers, Tony replied. She ignored him, turned, and walked toward the corridor without hurry. I'll see myself out. Tony called after her. Give my regards to the people who read your emails. She didn't turn. I don't write emails. He made a face. That's terrifying. The door shut. For a few seconds, the room felt wider. Tony blew out a breath and rubbed the back of his neck. She's not a paralegal, he said. You know that, right? I set the coiled net on the table. I know what she is, I said lightly. And she's good. He nodded. Very good. He tapped the reactor housing with the back of one knuckle. You see any other adjustments you want to make before I take this thing to sound check at the expo? 2, I said cheerfully. Let me check the left calf servo and your right forearm coolant tube. It's a little hot. Do it, he said, and stepped back into the rig without complaint. I tightened a single fastener near his calf and adjusted a small coolant valve with my thumb. The numbers fell neatly into place. Done, I said. I looked up at him. You good? He held my gaze for a second. I'm good. I believed him. For now. We finished the adjustments, logged the test, and stepped away from the rig. Tony looked like he wanted to say something else, then didn't. He looked toward the ocean through the glass wall, then back at me. I have a meeting, he said. Do me a favor and don't invent a nuclear reactor in my basement while I'm gone. I would never do something that obvious, I said cheerfully. He smirked and walked out. The door slid closed behind him. I packed my gear slowly, letting my hands move while my head cooled. I tucked the jammer into its foam slot and coiled the net cable carefully. I reached for the clamp and paused when I felt someone in the doorway. Natalie stood there in the frame, hands relaxed at her sides, expression calm. She didn't make noise when she walked. She looked at the bag, then at me. Got a minute? She asked softly. Sure, I said, bright and even. Want a protein bar? They taste like chalk and survival. No, thank you, she said. She stepped in and let the door close. I'll be brief. I straightened and gave her my full attention. My smile stayed. My tone stayed light, but my focus sharpened the way it always did when the stakes moved. What's up? Hammer Industries increased its deliveries to the expo site, she said. 2 additional trucks overnight, unlogged. Pepper will see a clean invoice. The actual manifests looked different before they were altered. I nodded once. Where? South Loading Bay, she said. Hardware cages 12 and 14. I considered that. 2 cages, South Bay, off manifest. Drones, I said. Or parts. Maybe power. Possibly, she said. Your jammers worked today. Keep them ready. Always, I said. She glanced at my bag again. You built those alone? Yeah, I said cheerfully. If they look expensive, I did a bad job. A small line of amusement touched her eyes without reaching her mouth. Pepper trusts you. So does Happy. I try to be trustable, I said. It lowers my blood pressure. I'll be on site at the expo, she said. If you see something that needs action, tell me. Not on a radio. In person. Got it, I said. I meant it. Thanks for the heads up. She gave a quick nod. Good, she said, and turned to go. Then she paused, looked back at the armor for a second, and chose her next words with care. He'll push himself. I know, I said. My voice stayed cheerful, but the layer beneath it went steady and serious. I'll be there. She accepted that and left without another word. When the door slid shut behind her, I exhaled and felt the shift in my chest ease. I finished packing and slung the bag over my shoulder. I stood for a moment with a palm on the cool edge of the workbench and let my head step through the next steps. I went home. The tunnel welcomed me with its familiar hum. I checked the dampening field just because my hands needed to touch something real after a day of watching other people hold their balance. The lines on the console looked calm and ordinary. I set the bag on the bench, opened it again, and checked each device a second time. The snare's coils were clean. The jammer's power cell read full. The clamp's magnet held firm. I put a kettle on the small hot plate and brewed strong tea because coffee would have kept me up too long. I stood in front of the mech and checked its anchor points with the same pressure I always used when I needed peace. It stayed still. It didn't need me tonight. That helped. My phone buzzed once. Pepper. Natalie will be at the expo every day. She said you handled the tests well. Thank you. One more thing, Hammer's people keep trying to add new cables. I'm sending you a map. I tapped back, got it. Send me anything that smells wrong. I'll keep my eyes level and my mouth shut unless you need the opposite. Her reply was quick. I always need the opposite. But for now, yes. Keep eyes open. Thank you. The map arrived in a second message. I spread it on the console, zoomed the southern loading bay, and traced the two cages with the tip of my finger. 12 and 14. Hammer liked as many points of failure as he could afford. He never noticed that each extra point was one more thing that could break. Vanko would notice. He would rig them in his favor. That wasn't my problem until it put people next to danger. I brewed a second cup and set it aside to cool. I grabbed a lighter toolkit and packed a smaller bag. I added 2 extra snare coils and a second jammer just in case the first cooked itself under continuous use. I labeled one with a strip of tape that said Expo A and the other Expo B in clear block letters. I sent Happy a message, walk the Expo exit routes tomorrow. South Bay is cluttered. If you have a choice, steer Tony west if anything goes wrong. He responded with a thumbs up and a short, on it. I turned the lights down, stretched my back until it popped, and lay back on the cot. My head buzzed like it always did after a day that asked for focus. I wasn't worried. I didn't have time for that. I made a list in my head instead. Bring tools. Watch the South Bay. Keep the counters on me. Keep the jokes light. Keep the people safe. The next morning came with more emails and one call from Tony that lasted 40 seconds. He wanted confirmation the jammers were retuned. I told him yes. He told me to show up after lunch with a clipboard and an attitude. I laughed and said I had both. By early afternoon I was at the expo site in a neon vest that made me look like a person who could move boxes without being questioned. Pepper had a pass for me that didn't say my name. She pressed it into my hand, looked me in the eye, and whispered, "Please," like the word had 1,000 jobs to do. "Always," I said cheerfully. "I'll tape everything that tries to fall down." That got a quick smile from her before she turned to 3 different people asking 3 different questions. Happy waved at me from the edge of the stage, pointed at a line of road cases, and shouted, "You good?" "All good," I shouted back. I walked the south loading bay on a slow loop. Hammer's cages sat where Natalie said they would. 12 and 14. Their locks were new. Their casters looked cheap. The labels said lighting truss and spare cabling. The inventory stickers had been printed in a hurry. The corners peeled. I circled once, twice, then walked past them without stopping. I placed one adhesive tag under the lowest metal lip where no one would look and pressed it until the click registered through my finger. I kept moving. 2 of Hammer's techs rolled a cart out of the service hall. They looked at me, then looked away. One of them scanned a barcode with a gun that chirped a flat tone. The screen flashed red. He slapped it with the heel of his hand. It chirped green. I smiled and kept walking. People who hit their tools never learned. I checked the server room because Pepper had asked me to. I stood with my hands behind my back and watched a tech swap a cable. He did it correctly. I didn't help. I didn't touch anything. I left. I spent the rest of the afternoon moving through the expo like a person rehearsing a part they had already played. Security walked in pairs. Staff taped down cable runs. The stage crew ran sound tests. Tony's people shuffled their gear and swapped parts and held things up and put them down and taped and shouted and smiled through stress. It looked like an event. It also looked like a place that had room for one wrong line to ruin. I filed that feeling next to my list and did not let it take up more space than it needed. When the sun started down, I headed back to the tunnel. I took the service elevator. I counted the seconds out of habit. At the bottom, the cool air hit me with the same straight comfort it always did. I set the bag on the bench and sat. I leaned my head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling for a second. My chest felt steady. My hands felt ready. My phone buzzed one more time. Natalie. South Bay Power rerouted 5% to cage 14. Not on plans. Tell Pepper you need access to check grounding. I will clear it from my side. I typed, on it. Then I stood, repacked the bag with the right tools, and went back up. Tomorrow would be long. I didn't mind. It meant I'd be where I needed to be when someone else made their move. I stayed cheerful because that was my balance. I stayed ready because that was my choice. I slept 3 hours and woke up to the sound of the generator's cycle. I smiled at it and said, "Good morning," out of habit. Then I got to work. Chapter 21, South Bay Grounding. I got there early, before the crews started shouting and the music checks started popping. The air at the expo grounds felt sharp with fresh paint and dust.